Welcome to Mindful with Mina, where we explore how mindfulness can enhance your relationships and well-being. I'm your host, Mina B, a licensed social worker, mental health educator, and author. Through insightful discussions, I will guide you towards self-awareness and self-efficacy, empowering you to effectively manage your relationships, reduce burnout, and be more present with yourself. So let's jump into today's episode. What's up, Mindful community? Before we jump into today's episode, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to leave a review on my podcast, for sharing it with a friend, but most importantly, for subscribing. I see all of the quotes and comments you all make after listening to each episode, and I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I also just want to share a few reminders on how you can connect with me outside of the podcast. You can sign up for my newsletter, Mindful with Mina, where I share different tips and insights on how to continuously maintain healthy relationships with yourself and with others. And also remember that I am the author of the book, Owning Our Struggles, A Path to Healing and Finding Community in a Broken World, which is available across all major book retailers. You can also listen to my book on Audible, and you can also find my book on Kindle. So again, just sharing different ways that you can stay connected with me and my work. And most importantly, remember to follow me on social media. But I try my best to respond to every comment, respond to every DM. And I just love when I see you all sharing my podcast in your story. So thank you so much. And so for today's episode, I actually want to talk about coping with friendship loss and the grief that comes up when a friendship ends. And that is because episode 7 is getting a lot of traction. So episode 7 is titled Signs You're in an Emotionally Abusive Friendship. And it seems as if a lot of you can relate to that. A lot of you have experienced emotionally abusive friendships. And from my takeaways, I wanted to provide a space for you all to cope and grieve the fact that a friendship wasn't what you thought it was. And maybe in the midst of being in that relationship, you find yourself dealing with so much heartache from the loss of that friendship, you know? And so for today's episode, I really just want to unpack grief and loss in the context of a friendship ending. Grief is often associated with the loss of a loved one, but it can also occur when a friendship ends. And I think that it's not talked about enough because unlike romantic relationships, which have societal norms and language to define their stages, including their end, I feel that friendships lack this structure, making friendship endings confusing and hard to navigate. And sometimes it can be minimized when you talk about it, or you can even feel dismissed when you talk about the loss of a friendship, where we kind of hold space for people who are dealing with heartbreak from a romantic relationship. But sometimes I think people struggle with holding space even for themselves when they're dealing with the loss of a friendship. And I think what's also worse is that society often downplays the importance of friendships, usually giving more importance to romantic and familial relationships. And so because of that, this can make the pain of losing a friendship feel overlooked or even disregarded. But I truly believe that it's crucial to understand that grieving the loss of a friendship is perfectly normal and valid. Friendships significantly influence our lives, and their absence can create a void that needs to be recognized and mourned. Like any other thing that we lose. If you lose a job, it makes sense that you're going to mourn that. If you lose a romantic partner, it's going to make sense that you're going to mourn that relationship. And we do need to hold space for that in friendships. I believe the process of grieving a friendship is similar to any other form of grief, and it involves different stages. For those of you who are familiar with the 5 stages of grief, which is anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So initially, you may deny the end of the friendship, or you may even deny the reality of the friendship. So for those of you who listen to episode 7, you may deny the fact that that was an emotionally abusive relationship, because it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I stayed in something that was so toxic and detrimental to my mental health this whole entire time. And so when you start to gain greater awareness of what's happening in that friendship, it can lead to anger. And remember, anger often is the response to some sort of loss. Anger is a response to some sort of hurt. Anger tends to be a secondary emotion. And at the root of anger, there are other complex feelings that we're experiencing about the circumstances. And so I also want you to be thinking about how it's okay to feel angry when a friendship ends. It's also okay to feel angry when you recognize the signs and the patterns of that friendship and you see, man, I was really stuck in a very toxic friendship. And that makes me so angry. I can't believe I gave years of my life to this person. I can't believe I gave so much of my time and my energy and my resources to this person just for it to end this way, you know? And so anger really needs to be normalized in our society. And it's okay to be angry when a friendship ends. Another thing that might happen is you might find yourself bargaining or wishing for things to go back to how they were. And so when you start to find that you're experiencing ruptures in a friendship, you might start wishing and hoping that things can go back to how it was when we met on the playground. Like we had no cares in the world and we fought over pencils and we fought over little minor things, but now we're adults. And the things that we're fighting about, we really have to use communication to resolve those things. And so sometimes you might find yourself bargaining and making bids for connection or bids for attention to try to get the relationship back to where you want it to be. And sometimes you might realize at the end of that man, like, I'm doing all of this bargaining and I'm doing all of this wishing, but reality is telling me that this is not a friendship that can go any further. And because of that, this may now lead to a period of sadness or depression. Imagine having a friendship for 20 years and all of a sudden it's just gone. You know, I can think of my own life that a lot of my core intimate friendships are people that I've known since I was a child or probably much like early adulthood. So, for example, my best friend and I have known each other since we were 6 years old. So that is a 25 plus year relationship. It is going to make sense that if I were in a circumstance where our friendship ended, I would be in shambles. I would be hurt. Even if our friendship ended because my best friend hurt me, that's 25 years of my life tied to someone that I love, tied to someone that I made memories with. And so I think it's really all about allowing yourself to just grieve and allowing yourself to feel anger, to feel sadness, to feel depression, because this is someone that you invited into your life. This is someone who knows your business. In my context, my best friend and I, our families are each other's families. I call her mother, mom. She calls my mom. You know what I mean? And so that's more than a friendship. This person is now a chosen family member. And so over time, when you find yourself in a situation where you're experiencing a friendship loss, it's okay to go through those different stages. It's okay to be in a state of denial for a long time. You just want to make sure that you're doing the work of recognizing, like, I need to practice self-awareness, because the longer I stay in denial, the more I might be prone to being hurt because I'm not allowing myself to acknowledge the truth of my friendship. And that might lead to anger. And it's okay to feel angry. It's also okay to bargain and wish that things could go back to what they were. But once you get through that period of sadness and depression, you might find yourself practicing radical acceptance and realizing, man, this is over. The friendship is over and I have to move on. So I want to talk about reasons why some friendships end. So in episode 7, I unpacked emotionally abusive friendships. And in that episode, I talked about bullying in friendships, physical harm in friendships. And so that is one of the main reasons why a friendship can end, when you start to recognize that this friendship is actually harmful and abusive. There is mental, emotional, and even physical abuse happening in this relationship. And the only way to heal is to create separation. The only way to heal is to terminate this relationship altogether. together because this is an abusive relationship, and it can be really hard to stay in a relationship with someone who is abusive and is not doing the work to manage their behaviors, to manage their patterns, and to be self-reflective enough to see how they're harming other people. So that is a core reason why some friendships end, and I really encourage you to go back to that episode when you're done listening to this so that you can really pick up on the signs and the patterns that manifest when you are in an emotionally abusive relationship. Because emotional abuse is so subtle, people tend to not realize that they are being emotionally abused. So another reason why friendships can end is because you've outgrown each other. Friendships often evolve as we grow and change as individuals, and sometimes we may find that our interests, beliefs, or even our lifestyles no longer align with the people that we call friend. And this can lead to a natural drifting apart. And so it's important to remember that it is okay to outgrow relationships and allow space for new friendships that align with the current path that you're on. There are going to be times where you want to grow with someone, but you just recognize that maybe in the midst of you healing and in the midst of you becoming a better person, your eyes kind of open up to the world around you, and you might realize, man, this friendship was dysfunctional this whole time. I have been existing in a codependent relationship this whole time. I have been existing in a friendship that suffocates me, where it's one-sided. And so you might start to see things happening in your relationships with people as you do your own healing work, and that can cause you to grow separately from someone. And I think that that is something that we kind of have to be okay with acknowledging, that there are going to be times where we do outgrow people. However, I will say that you don't necessarily always have to have the same interest or lifestyle as someone that you consider a friend. It is possible for two people who have two totally different worlds to continue to grow with one another, but you have to put in the effort. You have to be intentional with allowing that friendship to grow. If you recognize that there are differences now, because maybe, for example, you were both single friends and one friend got married and now they have children, or maybe you find that both of you were married and now one friend is going through a divorce and that friend is now a single parent. There are so many life changes that can happen to an individual that will impact how they show up in the relationships around them. So if I become a mother, then it's realistic that my time is going to be a little more stretched, and therefore I may not be able to show up in my friendship the same way I did when we were two single women and didn't have children, but now I have a kid. And so I have this baby that needs my time, my energy, and attention. And there are still ways that if we are intentional with one another, we can continue to flourish in that relationship. But if we're not being intentional and recognizing the ebb and flows of how we evolve as people, then that is what stops people from growing together. Because you have to be okay with people changing if you want to maintain a relationship with them. Nobody is obligated to be the person that they were when they met you. And so when you find yourself in a position where you're not allowing the life of the people around you to evolve, then that is what suffocates a lot of friendships. And therefore, it can be really hard to grow with someone who wants you to be the person that you were 5 years ago. As I shared earlier, my best friend and I have known each other since we were 6 years old. Imagine my best friend expecting me to be the Mina that I was when I was 15 or 18 or 25. At 30 something years old, it's not realistic to expect me to be the person that I was when I was 20, because my lifestyle is completely different. And it's the same for my best friend. Imagine if I had that expectation. And so it's really just important to take inventory of the ways that we show up in our relationships. And sometimes a friendship can end if we're not willing to do the work of trying to grow with one another. Now, another common reason I find that friendships end is because there is a lack of reciprocity. And so a one-sided relationship looks like when only one person puts in the work to maintain that relationship. And this can lead to feelings of resentment as well as exhaustion and burnout in trying to sustain that relationship. If I am the only person checking in on you, if I am the only person trying to plan hangouts, if I am the only person being intentional of just really doing the work to maintain a relationship with you, at some point I'm going to develop resentment toward you, but I'm also going to resent myself, because I'm going to feel like, why am I putting in all this effort if it's not being returned? And another thing is going to happen is I'm going to feel exhausted. I'm going to be exhausted by rejection, and I'm going to be exhausted by literally carrying the whole load of the friendship. And I find that there are times where people are existing in imbalanced friendships and they are not aware of it. And so it's really important to recognize, again, people change. We are allowed to change. As you change, however, it is still important to update the rules of that friendship. It is still important to do the work of checking in and say, I'm in this new stage of life, so these are the things that I can do for you. However, these are the things that I cannot do for you because I have so many obligations. I'm being stretched thin. I may not be able to talk to you on the phone 24/7, but maybe once a week we can have a check-in. I may not be able to see you every single weekend for brunch, but maybe we can shift to once a month because this is where I'm at in my life. And when we communicate that, this can really help with mitigating this feeling that we are in a one-sided relationship, because both people are coming together to say, hey, these are my needs and expectations, but I also want to listen to your needs and expectations. And this is how we can compromise with one another. What are your boundaries? What are your rules? What are your needs? What are your expectations? And let's come together and use discernment and be mindful of each other's needs and expectations and say, you know what, this is what I can do for you, but I need to let you know what I can't do for you. Because the more a relationship stays one-sided, the more the person who is doing all the work to maintain that relationship, you're going to feel burnt out, and it makes sense that you're going to want to end that friendship. Now, another common reason why I find that friendships end is because of poor conflict resolution skills. And I think that this requires a greater conversation. I believe that every friendship encounters conflict at some point. However, the way these conflicts are handled can greatly impact the health of the friendship. Poor conflict resolution skills, such as avoidance or being passive aggressive or even engaging in hostility, can cause unresolved issues that pile up and strain the relationship. And so it's crucial to learn to apply healthy communication, having empathy, and learning to compromise with people as a part of building strong friendships. But I think at the heart of these issues is a society that does not equip people with the skills to nurture platonic relationships as we do with romantic ones. When couples have ruptures in their marriage or relationship, we will encourage couples counseling because we want to give the couples the skills that they need to nurture that relationship. But I don't feel like that same level of grace and that same level of, I would call, tools and strategies to nurture relationships are given to friendships. I find that in our society, it's acceptable to publicly discuss difficulties in relationships, but when you start to discuss difficulties in friendships, it's often seen as gossiping, backstabbing. In our society, it's like, you're not a girl's girl. How can you say the things that you're saying about your friend and call them a friend? But there are people who will literally talk about how they can't stand their partner, And so to give an example of that, Michelle Obama openly stated in front of millions of people that she could not stand her husband for 10 years, y'all, when their kids were children. Now, imagine if she had shared that she could not stand her best friend for 10 years. That would have likely had been considered controversial, in my opinion. I think people would have probably created thoughts describing her behavior as cruel or saying, oh, Michelle must be envious of her friend. How dare she openly tell the world that she couldn't stand her best friend for 10 years? How could you openly discuss the negative feelings that you have towards your friend? But in our society, we openly talk about the difficulties of romantic relationships. And I think the core thing to understand here is that our friends are human, and there will be times when we need to process our feelings about them. There are going to be times where we complain about our friends, where we vent about our friends, where we feel frustrated with our friends, and honestly, when we feel like we can't stand our friends. We need to have healthy outlets that we can actually say those things out loud and process, well, what is happening in the friendship? What are the things that you need to communicate in the friendship? What are the areas where you need to compromise in the friendship the same way we do with couples? And so what would it look like if we acknowledged friendship therapy the way we do couples therapy? What would happen if we acknowledged friendship breakups the same we do romantic breakups or divorce? If such a space existed, we might see less instances of friends ghosting each other, and instead, they would acknowledge when it's time to part ways, or they would acknowledge, you know what, we need to fine tune our relationship because there are so many ruptures. We need additional support to figure out how to get through them. I truly believe that if there was better language to support non-romantic relationships, we wouldn't struggle with figuring out how to grow together because there would be resources in place to help us understand how to make a friendship thrive in the same way society aims to see marriages thrive. I also believe we wouldn't feel guilty about friendships ending if we acknowledged that forever is a myth and longevity should not be our aim. But it makes sense that people haven't acknowledged that because as a society, we still believe all romantic relationships are supposed to last forever. And I think we kind of approach friendship with that same manner. And I will never forget when my sister said to me once that there are people who are in your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And so while some relationships can last a lifetime, there are others that may only span a season. And these friendships are just as valuable as friendships that last a lifetime. And those seasonal friendships deserve recognition as a fundamental part of our lives. But even when something is seasonal, you will still deal with the grief of that season coming to an end. And so I want to move to a space now of what you can be doing to heal from the loss of a friendship because this can be challenging. And as I shared earlier, because we live in a society that doesn't really provide language around how to cope with the divorce of a friendship or a friendship breakup, it can feel like maybe you're being dramatic. Sometimes we gaslight ourselves and we say, I'm being overreactive or I'm being dramatic or I'm being very sensitive that this friendship ended. And it's like, no, you're not being sensitive. This was somebody who you cared for. This is someone that you did life with. And it makes sense that now that that relationship is over, whether you knew that person for a reason or a season or even most of your life, it's okay to grieve that loss. So the first thing that I think is important when it comes to healing from friendship loss is acknowledging your feelings. It's imperative to let grief expand instead of trying to suppress it. Grief is simply a reaction to loss, and sometimes you may even feel grief after the loss of an unhealthy friendship. And there are a few reasons why this can happen. One of the reasons may be is because you might find yourself mourning the parts of your life that you lost in the midst of operating in a dysfunctional friendship. And so your grief might feel very complicated. And that grief is complicated because you're reflecting and realizing you've given so much of yourself to a person who either was never giving anything back or what they were giving back to you was dysfunction. Maybe they were emotionally abusive, mentally abusive. It was a one-sided, imbalanced relationship. It was a chaotic, toxic relationship. And you realize, man, I lost so much of myself in this friendship, and I wish I could take those years back, but I can't. And that is going to bring up some sadness. And I think it's really important to hold space for that. Another thing that can happen is you may be grieving the loss of the positive aspects of that relationship. It's always important to remember that people are not simply bad or good. They can be both simultaneously. However, when the negatives outweigh the positives, the healthiest choice might be to leave the relationship alone. However, you may still have had good times, even in that dysfunctional, chaotic relationship. Remember, two things can be true. People can be both bad and good. I can experience joy in this relationship, and I can also experience pain and frustration in this relationship. And when a friendship ends, we don't have to demonize the person and say, well, you were all bad and you were this, and point the finger and say you were a toxic, terrible person. It's okay to acknowledge, like, you know what? They were toxic, they were dysfunctional, but there were so many parts of the relationship that I enjoyed. And that is why I stayed in it. There were so many things. It felt good to just have a friend. Maybe it's that. It felt good when we did certain activities together. But it's really unfortunate that the negatives outweighed the positives. And there's no possible way that I can sustain this relationship moving forward. And it's okay to acknowledge that. You may also experience grief due to the changes resulting from the loss of a friendship. So, an ended friendship might mean fewer phone calls, fewer text messages throughout the day, one less person to hang out with, feeling triggered or activated by memories of that person. It might even shift certain dynamics, such as how you spend holidays with someone. Let's say, for example, if your friend was considered a close family member. There are people who their friends have become their chosen family. And so for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever holiday that you celebrate, you were at that friend's house. And now that you've terminated that friendship, who am I spending the holidays with? Or let's say it's vice versa. And so now it's the holidays and people are going to be asking, where's your friend? Why aren't they here? They heard every single holiday for the last 10 years. Where are they? And that can bring up so much pain. And so I say all of these things to remind you that you are going to have to feel things in order to heal. And you are going to have to allow yourself to feel pain, sadness, anger, and any other emotions that come with loss. Don't suppress it. Don't ignore it. It's okay to mourn the end of a friendship. And when we're mourning, we're going to experience complicated grief. And that is just a natural part of moving from one part of life to another part of life, because there's a huge shift and transition happening. And so when you find yourself trying to cope with friendship loss, I truly believe that it's really important to co-regulate and reach out to other people, because you don't want to have to go through that process alone. And so it's really important to find supportive systems so that you can have a healthy outlet where you can process that loss without the people in your life trying to minimize that loss. And sometimes you want to be in relationships with people and cope with people who can acknowledge the complexity of that loss. I find that sometimes in friendships, people will be like, in order to make you feel better, I have to bash that person. So let's bash that friend. And you might say, you know what? I know they were toxic. I know they were dysfunctional, but I don't need that right now because they were not all bad. And so my grief is complicated right now because I miss them. I want them here. I want to talk to them, but I realize if I keep going down that pattern, it won't be healthy for my mental health. But it's not that they were so terrible. Now, maybe there are some friendships that were, but I think it's really just important to understand the complexities of things and make space for the nuances of friendship loss, because everything is not black and white, and the end of a friendship may not be black and white. It may not just be this person was so terrible, I have to end it. It could just be there are so many nuances in this relationship that I realize even though there's good, there are things in this relationship happening that I just can't continue to maintain this friendship. And I need people in my life who can sit with me in that, who can hear me say that. And instead of your rebuttal being, let's talk bad about this person or bash that person, you can hold space for the complexities of my emotions. And so I just want to remind you that it is important to just do the work of caring for yourself in the midst of grieving. But it's also important to do the work of letting yourself grieve. There is no timetable for grief. If you end a relationship, it's possible that 4 years down the line or even 10 years down the line, you might think about that person. You might get sparked with a memory and start reminiscing about that person. And that is okay. The grief that comes with the end of a friendship is real and it's important. So remember that it is okay to grieve. It's always okay to seek help in the process of your grieving. But most importantly, it's important to be in relationships with people that make you feel safe, that make you feel seen, and make you feel heard. And so when you recognize that a friendship has to come to an end, it is okay to mourn the end of that friendship. That's all for today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed what you just listened to, please take a moment to rate and review this podcast on your preferred platform. Also, don't forget to share it with a friend and on social media. To stay connected with me and my work, follow me on social media and subscribe to the Mindful with Mina newsletter, which can be found on my website, www.minab.com. You can also continue learning from me by ordering my book, Owning Our Struggles, which is available at all major book retailers. Stay tuned for a new episode next week, and most importantly, remember to be present and stay mindful. Take care and goodbye for now.